Hello and welcome to day 2 of Radiology Residence Week here in the Facebook MRI Safety Group. Today's topic really deals with patients in whom there are complications, risk factors relative to receiving an MR exam. And we're going to talk about the most common form of the risk factor, implants and devices or foreign bodies. And then we're also going to talk briefly about the underlying mechanism for patient evaluation, the risk-benefit analysis, and the importance of both of these for new radiology residents and their ability to identify and mitigate the risks associated with scanning these patients. The first of these is the labeling of implants and devices for MRI in the MR environment. There are 3 conventional labels: MR safe, MR unsafe, and MR conditional. If you see a label that says MRI with the I at the end, it is one of 2 things. It is a label or a designation that we stopped using in 2005, although a bunch of existing products were kind of grandfathered in and weren't forced to change their labeling. But if you see MRI safe, know immediately that that's at best old terminology, and at worst it's somebody who doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. So MR safe is just exactly what the name suggests. It is safe in all MR environments. MR unsafe, similarly, is exactly what the name suggests. There are fundamentally unsafe features that are true for all MR environments. It doesn't matter the field strength or magnet orientation, that sort of thing. If you were to take all of the MR safe and MR unsafe labeled implants and devices and group them together, it would be a P as compared to a massive volume of implants and devices that are labeled with MR conditional. So if you don't come across MR safe or MR unsafe labels, do not be at all surprised because they are few and far between. The one, therefore, that we tend to focus the majority of our attention on is MR conditional. And as MR safe suggested, it's safe in all MR conditions. MR unsafe suggests it's unsafe in all MR conditions. MR conditional means that there is an explicit defined set of conditions, and if you follow those conditions, the risks are negligible, maybe even non-existent. If you go outside of those conditions, essentially the manufacturer is saying, hey, we told you at the fork in the road, take the left-hand route. We're not making any promises what's going to happen if you take the right fork in the road. So MR conditional is essentially the manufacturer's statement that, hey, we tested it under the following set of conditions and we found there aren't undue risks if you follow these specific sets of conditions. And the conditions may include the way the implant or device was put into the patient. If it's a multi-component device, it may be each component of the device having been tested with each other component within the device. This is particularly true for pacemakers or neurostimulators that have different pulse generator and lead combinations. If the whole thing wasn't tested together, then the whole assembly can't be MR conditional, even if each of the constituent parts comes from a different MR conditional assembly. So it's really important that you understand if and when, not if, when referring physicians say, but it's an MR conditional implant, so you should be able to scan it. Well, maybe you could scan it on your 1.5, but not on your 3T, or maybe you could scan it only at absurdly restrictive RF values that, for whatever the particular purpose of the study is, would really preclude a diagnostic study. So for our RAD residents, it's really important that you understand that MR conditional means there are conditions, and it's not a blank check, carte blanche, in terms of being able to perform the study that the referrer wants to see. All of this comes down to risk versus benefit. Now, as a radiology resident, you are making risk-benefit determinations for every radiological procedure. In MRI, things can get hairy. Ultimately, the radiologist is, in the United States, the individual who makes the benefit determination for a particular referred study. And the radiologist weighs the benefit against the risk. However, particularly if you're beginning your radiology MRI career, you may need cliff notes. You may need phone a friend for the risk determination piece of this, because the risks are multifactorial, and they can get fairly complicated. Are we using the body coil, the walls of the tube, the radio frequency transmitters behind the walls of the tube? Are we doing a study that's using those for transmission, or are we using a local transmit receive coil? Many knee coils, for example, are local transmit and receive that constrain the radio frequency energy really to the anatomy in the region of interest, whereas the body coil essentially washes radio frequency energy over large areas beyond our region of interest. So I'm going to make the recommendation that if you can, steal a few hours and sit down with a senior MR technologist and watch them work and ask them questions. Why did you modify the pulse sequence? What is this normal mode versus first level control mode? Why are there different normals and first levels for time varying gradient and for radio frequency energy? Why would I want to modify normal or first level for time varying gradient? Why would I want to do it for radio frequency energy? And begin to kind of wade into the shallow end of the risk assessment side of the risk-benefit analysis. Ultimately, this kind of introduction, this kind of, as I say, getting your feet wet in the risk assessment portion of the MRI is going to make you a superior radiologist when it comes to your MRI patients, being able to effectively identify when there really are meaningful risks to the patient, as opposed to when there are not meaningful risks to the patient. Obviously, we can, going back to the first half of the conversation, we can rely on MRI safe and MR conditional labeling to give us some manufacturer clear avenues towards safe scanning. But you will find in your practice that there are lots of times when we either don't have the manufacturer information to guide us in that decision-making process, or the information that they give us is devoid of, well, here is the official marking or labeling to inform your decision. And instead they give you, well, we made it out of this, and it's typically implanted in this location in the patient, and we manufactured this product in 2017, but we don't make any assertions about MRI safety. So it's up to you to kind of make those determinations for yourself. And when you're thrown in that deep end, and you will be thrown in that deep end, building this repertoire of risk assessment, risk mitigation strategies will be extraordinarily helpful to you. Anyway, Thank you for joining us for day 2 of Radiology Residence Week on the Facebook MRI Safety Group, and hope that this information is useful to you. Please, if you know of new radiology residents, invite them to the group, point them to these RadRes videos for Radiology Residence Week, and thank you all very much.